Hello, my name is Tatiana Zhitenyova. I lead UN Women's work on peace building and sustaining peace. And today we are starting a Peace Building Week, the inaugural Peace Building Week that is promoting peace building and conflict prevention values in the UN. UN Women is working very closely with a variety of partners, supporting women's leadership and participation in peace building, conflict prevention on the ground. And today we had an excellent event that convened civil society, UN organizations and member states discussing how we can ensure better support for women's locally led conflict prevention and peace building work, how we can provide safe and meaningful spaces for them to engage, and how to ensure a better predictable and sustainable and targeted funding for women-led peace-building work on the ground. We hope that the recommendations will inform the rest of the week's discussions and will also inform decision-making and financial allocations. Thank you.
The Peace Building and Peace Support Office, the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund. Tani is here as chief. ICAN, the global network of women peacebuilders, as well as the permanent missions of Australia, Denmark, Germany, Kyrgyz, Portugal, and Sweden for your collaboration and support. And it's wonderful to hear the word inaugural associated to something. We don't often hear that. And so let's celebrate that we are here to open the inaugural Peace Building Week with a conversation. And this conversation will focus on some critical questions. In particular, a critical question that matters very much for the future of peace building. How do we better support and scale the work that women peace builders are already undertaking, are already doing so effectively around the world to prevent conflict, to sustain peace in communities right across all regions? And the establishment of a dedicated annual space for peace building through the 2025 Peacebuilding Architecture Review actually sends a very, very important signal. And it is that at this growing time of increasing polarization, of fracturing across geopolitical spaces, where we see financial constraints, where we see greater donor concentration, where we see more pressures on multilateralism, member states, have reaffirmed some very critical perspectives. And one of those is that prevention, sustaining peace, and the full and equal, meaningful and safe participation of women and young people are absolute central priorities for the future of peace building. So the question before us now is, what do we do with this? How do we translate those commitments into concrete practice, into concrete action? Right across contexts, and here I mean contexts that are as diverse as we know them, from the Philippines to Colombia to Ukraine to Nigeria and beyond. All of these contexts have demonstrated how locally led approaches are so effective. How locally led approaches can very much build trust, can strengthen social cohesion, can be the very foundations to actually sustaining peace itself. And yet, despite the evidence that we know of on locally led approaches, it is women peace builders, especially at the local level, who remain least visible, who also remain, as we know, the least resourced actors in the peace building ecosystem and the architecture of peace building. So it is precisely this gap between what we know works and what we invest in that I think brings us around this table today. You are going to hear today about a forthcoming policy brief. And this policy brief is produced by UN Women, and it's entitled Learning from Women Peacebuilders. Learning from Women Peacebuilders, Pathways Towards Localizing Peacebuilding Policy and Practice. And this new document, this new policy brief, really intends to encapsulate those insights, those lessons learned, actually from more than 20 years of partnership with women peacebuilders and with local women's organizations right across regions around the world. And really, the message of that policy brief is quite clear. And it is that localization is not simply about moving activities more locally, more closer to communities. It is about recognizing and uplifting the expertise locally, about channeling resources to local actors, about building equitable and sustainable partnerships, and about strengthening enabling institutions and really ensuring that those who are closest to conflict can actually shape peace-building priorities and solutions. I think these messages that will be in the forthcoming policy brief that we hope you will all read and share were echoed consistently in consultations convened by UN Women with women and young women peacebuilders ahead of last year's Peacebuilding Architecture review. And we heard such consistent refrain right across regions, right across contexts, where women and young women peacebuilders were calling out that persistent gap between what we know and what is recognized, between what we know and what is supported, what we know and what is financed, and what we know and what is then translated into practice. And so that's why we're so grateful for this conversation today. The commitments are absolutely there. The evidence is there. I think the task before us all and before this conversation is about implementation. So to open our discussion, it's really my pleasure to invite Mr. Brian Williams, Chief of the Peacebuilding Fund branch, a long-standing and long-time partner and friend who represents the Peacebuilding and Peace Support Office, to share your opening remarks. Maybe I'll pass this over to you. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sarah, so much. Speaking of inaugural events, this is my inaugural event for Peacebuilding Week. I can't think of a nicer topic, a better topic than one which emphasizes the importance of supporting local organizations and supporting women's organizations and supporting gender equality and women's empowerment. Great to be here, and thank you so much for organizing this. Thanks to UN Women. Thank you to all the member states and civil society co-sponsors for organizing this event. It's really very important. I need to start off by acknowledging the difficult reality that we're facing. Conflicts are increasing. They're becoming more complex. Meanwhile, financial resources are under tremendous pressure. We're seeing tighter budgets, competing global priorities, and in many cases, declining support for precisely that gender equality and women's empowerment that we're here to discuss today. This is a serious challenge, would be a serious challenge anyway, but it's particularly serious because actually the increase in conflicts requires us to have more prevention and sadly more post-conflict peace building because of the increasing number of conflicts. So, you know, it shouldn't be more conflict, less peace building. Yeah. It should be even more peace building. So I count on all of us to be out there advocating for all of this. Fortunately, against this backdrop, the 2025 Peacebuilding Architecture Review did help us with a little bit of advocacy. They said that we need approaches that are more inclusive, more partnership-driven, and more focused on prevention. That prevention word was in that Peacebuilding Architecture Review, and we should all hang on to that and promote it tightly. The Peacebuilding Architecture Review further said that these efforts need to be nationally led, they need to be nationally owned, and they need to be better coordinated across the system, and they need financing. The message also builds on the Pact for the Future, which also pushed all of us to invest more in nationally owned prevention efforts, whether that's strategies, looking at social cohesion questions, or helping institutions to do a better job of thinking about the risks that their society faces. Every society faces social tensions. It only makes sense that a responsible government thinks about what those risks are and puts in place programs to address them. So, we know we need to do more despite all the pressures, and the question is not if, but rather how. And this is where locally led approaches become so important because, Sarah, as you mentioned, prevention starts at the community level. Communities are at the center of efforts, and often it is women that are at the center of those communities. Women Peacebuilders, as all of you in this room, virtual and physical, know, are often addressing root causes of conflict in every day of their lives. They're mediating disputes, they're building trust across divides, they're holding communities together in extraordinarily fragile situations. Their role is essential, not optional. At the Peacebuilding Fund, we've learned that if we want prevention to work, we need to support these efforts, and we need to do so in a more integrated way. For example, women's participation is not just about inviting women to be at the table. In many contexts, it also requires protection measures because speaking up can be risky, especially in fragile or politically tense environments. And at the same time, prevention mechanisms themselves only work if they're truly inclusive. Women need to be agents of change, not simply participants or somebody counted as participating in a meeting. Fortunately, we have seen some progress. Back in Peacebuilding Architecture's early days, 20 years ago, much of the focus was on national institutions, justice and security sectors, very important, but often it was a little bit too top-down in its approach. Women were included, but often framed as victims, and there was often limited support for civil society or community-level organizations. Since then, thanks to many of the organizations in this room, progress has been made. Peacebuilding actors have shifted towards more community-based approaches. This is certainly true for us as the Peacebuilding Fund. We've expanded our support to local mechanisms that are more accessible to women and other often excluded communities. Our objective is to make the United Nations peacebuilding support more responsive to the real and everyday risks that people face. Let me give a couple of examples. In Burundi, support since 2015 has helped to strengthen the Women Mediators Network. Through a project led by UN Women, women mediators have resolved more than 34,000 conflicts and facilitated over 36,000 dialogues with strong participation from women across communities. That's prevention in action and at scale. In other countries like the Gambia, Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, Liberia, as well as in Mozambique, support from the fund have helped women to claim land rights, to mediate land-related disputes, which are often at the source of many conflicts. In places facing resource pressures, like in Somalia, Sierra Leone, and Yemen, women have been central to addressing tensions over water, for example, through more inclusive and gender-sensitive approaches to governance over these scarce resources. 2 weeks ago, I was in Niger myself. I was outside of Niamey. I was attending an event where women mediators were presenting some of their stories to us. And those women mediators were saying that as a result of the leadership and empowerment trainings that they received, they were able not only to do a better job of managing conflicts inside their own households, but also inside their villages, between households in their villages, and across communities inside Niger. So, sometimes people don't like the soft or training. More training is not what we need. But a couple of weeks ago, I got direct evidence that this kind of empowerment that comes when programs support women and local organizations directly can lead to real meaningful behavior change and peace building. These examples show what we can do. So what else do we need to do moving forward? First, we need to find ways to scale this kind of support so that it's not just a short-term project, one or two small projects, but that somehow the investments are sustained, even in our constrained funding environment. And second, we need to shift power closer to communities, making it easier for local actors, especially women, to access funding and shape priorities, because if we don't do that, prevention simply will not hold. The Peacebuilding Fund aims to do more in both of these points, scaling and localizing. We aim to do this by utilizing the fund's resources, we're a fund after all, to incentivize the full United Nations system to put community organizations at the forefront of peacebuilding work. That means community organizations need to do the analysis, the strategy design, the implementation, the monitoring, the learning, and of course, to receive the financing. In 2025, more than 18% of the fund's resources were channeled through local organizations. This is not enough, but it is also not an insignificant amount. It's something that we're tracking, and it's something that we want to do more of. This year, we're doing an evaluation of our current global strategy, 2020 to 2026, and we'll be preparing the ground for a new multi-year strategy that starts in 2027 with the new Secretary General, whomever she may be. We are developing an idea to propose as part of this new strategy. I call it the Partnership Promotion Initiative. And the idea here is to expand the catalytic function of the Peacebuilding Fund. And declining resources, we need more partnerships, we need to be more catalytic. And this includes by more partnerships with civil society, as well as more partnerships with IFIs and the private sector. Let me end on this. If we are serious about sustaining peace, we need to be serious about supporting women peace builders and local organizations, not just in words, but in practice, even, or maybe even especially, when resources are tight. So I encourage all of you to join in collective advocacy efforts with civil society, with member states, donor member states, partner member states, all governments. Let's advocate with them in order to increase our support for local and women's organizations. Thank you.
Thank you so very much.
Country level, at community level, it's about everyday issues, right? And so the trick is, how do we maximize the resources that are used, that we've received from somebody who want to build peace, for something that sometimes at community level looks like it's straight up development? And the answer to that question is local level coordination. So on the UN side, resident coordinators, there's the SURF for Humanitarian, there's other sources of Humanitarian, there's local multi-partner trust funds, there's the PBF. We all want to be flexible, but we all don't want to risk alienating a donor that's given us money for a specific purpose, and we don't want to put the burden on the local community. The answer is local coordination. Number two, livelihoods. A lot of issues raised about livelihood support, the importance of economic growth, etc., etc. Partnership with the larger development banks, the IFIs, is so important here. Because the Peacebuilding Fund is not going to do a nationwide jobs program, no matter how much we recognize that jobs are essential to peace. It's not that we don't get it. It's that to do jobs in a big way. So we need to do more partnership so that those larger funding flows are more peace intentional in their work and end up with more peace impact. And number three, on sustained financing, we are the catalytic fund, because many of our donors want us to be the catalytic fund. So I encourage everybody to advocate for that sustained solidarity. I like the solidarity word. The sustained solidarity that's required for institutional accompaniment. That is really, really important. But we need broad support in order to be able to move in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian. And I think that word of sustained solidarity is one that certainly I will take away. I think we've heard today across so many examples, and with really just a huge note of thanks for the women and young women peace builders who spoke to us directly today. And the question is really not about whether they're advancing solutions, but the question is whether we're prepared to support them at the scale that's required and with that sustained solidarity in mind. 3 points as we closed. We do need to move resources closer to where the prevention actually happens, noting what Brian just said, around the false binary of siloism. Secondly, we need to move beyond localization as an implementation approach and really embrace it as a principle of decision making and how we can do that. And finally, how do we invest in the conditions that actually make prevention possible? Here, we've heard about these today. We've heard about civic space, the supporting of the leadership of women and young women peace builders, of really recognizing climate insecurity and displacement, of the inequality of care impacts of conflict. These are not peripheral concerns, but they actually need to be brought also into the heart of what makes prevention possible. And Brian, to quote you, it was peace-informed decision-making.
Peace-intentional.
Peace-intentional. I'm going to use that, peace-intentional. I think a huge note of thanks to the women peace builders we heard from today, who are not asking us to reinvent prevention. They're asking us to recognize it, to resource it, and really to learn from it. A hearty note of thanks on behalf of UN Women and all the co-organizers. I won't repeat all of your names. All the partners, all the speakers, all the participants, the amazing technology. That was the most seamless translation that I have seen to date in a meeting. Wowzers. For contributing to this important discussion. And as this inaugural Peacebuilding Week begins, let us ensure that locally led prevention really moves from aspiration to practice. and from the margins of peace-building discussions to the center of our collective efforts to sustain peace. Thank you, everyone. There's still lots of food outside for those of you who are here. Enjoy it, and to all of you, we wish you a very effective peace-building week ahead with appreciation. Thank you.